My name is Whatismoo, and this is a brief field guide to the vehicles of the Soviet Army. It is not meant to be a gripping edge-of-your-seat guide to the minutiae of every nut and bolt of the Soviet system, but more of a quick and dirty practical introduction to a somewhat poorly understood topic. That said, I am working from open sources listed in the description, and as such cannot, unfortunately, bring you any of the great secrets of the universe. For example, the interactions between armor and anti-armor systems are incredibly complex, and frankly, the minutiae is popularly overemphasized, in no small part due to games such as War Thunder and World of Tanks, which, while very fun, do not necessarily reflect the combined arms nature of late Cold War warfare. As such, armor discussion is generally limited to qualitative rather than quantitative features. The exact composition of frontal armor arrays, in terms of materials and millimeters, is rather less than useful to the infantry soldier faced with an onrushing Soviet main battle tank. Knowing which tanks need a law and which tanks need a tow is perhaps somewhat more germane. With this all out of the way, let's dive into Section 1, Tanks. The Soviet Army is often thought of as a tank army. This isn't quite true. The Soviet Army was an artillery army which happened to have quite a number of tanks. They had so many and such a consistent design philosophy that they all tend to blur together. This isn't helped by the fact that the Soviets, at the end of the Cold War, had 3 main battle tanks which did all approximately the same job, looked very similar, and went through multiple radical upgrades during their service lives. Before we dive in, I want to stress again that threat estimation, especially the performance of threat armor, is more of an analytical art than a hard science. The descriptions I give here are more illustrative than authoritative and without large-scale firing trials cannot effectively be verified. Take them with a grain of salt. Speaking of large-scale firing trials, the PT-76 light tank was widely exported and saw extensive combat service with the People's Army of Vietnam against the United States and Army of the Republic of Vietnam forces in the late 1960s and early 1970s, where it became the first Soviet tank destroyed by the BGM-71 TOW. It entered production in 1952, a new modern amphibious light tank to fulfill a reconnaissance role. Eventually, about 3,000 PT-76s would be produced, with later production introducing a number of refinements, minor upgrades, and a stabilizer. The PT-76 had a 3-person crew consisting of a commander-gunner, a driver-mechanic, and a loader. To allow the PT-76 to swim, it was very poorly armored, being vulnerable to 7.62mm NATO armor-piercing sides and rear within combat ranges. The turret was armored to stop 50 caliber ball at combat ranges, but anything more penetrative or closer would cause severe issues. It was armed with a 76mm rifled gun and a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun, which was capable against contemporary NATO light armor, the sides of contemporary NATO main battle tanks, and had a heat shell with marginal frontal performance against the NATO main battle tanks of the 1950s, but was of dubious utility by the 1970s. The T-54-55 series was the workhorse of the Soviet tank fleet during the 1950s and 60s, the most produced tank in history, and remained a popular tank in Warsaw Pact fleets through the end of the Cold War. Note the 1 forward road wheel, then the gap and the 4 rear road wheels. An immediate post-World War II medium tank design with a 100mm rifled gun, the T-54 Sans Suffix, or T-54 Slick, went through 2 early variants before settling on the familiar upside-down frying pan-shaped turret. These early tanks are known as the T-54 Model 1947 and the T-54 Model 1949, while the frying pan turret we know and love was introduced on the T-54 Model 1951. The T-54 Model 1947 turret can be identified by its very distinctive shape, while the Model 1949 has a somewhat egg-shaped turret that's about halfway between the distinctive, almost pointed Model 1947 turret and the more familiar Model 1951 turret. The T-54 was produced from 1946 to 1959 in the USSR and had pure steel armor. The front was vulnerable to 105mm APDS as fired by the L7 gun on the M48A5 Patton, the Centurion Mark V/2, the M60, the Leopard 1, and Friends, as well as 90mm heat should the fuse work as fired by the earlier Pattons, as well as the M72A2 66mm light anti-tank rocket or better, while the sides were vulnerable to the original M72 light anti-tank missiles or any more effective anti-tank weapon. The T-55 and T-55A were similar to the late model T-54, but with the addition of a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear protection system for the crew, as well as a couple more rounds of ammunition. It was produced from 1955 to 1981 in the USSR. It also adds a bore evacuator at the end of the gun, although some of the late model T-54s appear to have this as well, so that shouldn't be taken as a 100% indication of a T-55. The T-55 and T-55A, which differ due to an engine arrangement, are not meaningfully different than the T-54 unless you're in an environment where the air is zesty or someone's opened up a can of instant sunshine. The T-55AM was designed in the 1970s as a modernization package for the T-55A. It adds the Ilyich Eyebrows up armor kit, a modern laser rangefinder and fire control system, smoke grenades, and the ability to use the AT-10 Stabber, gun-launched anti-tank guided missile, as well as fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds. It entered service in 1983 and was widely seen in Warsaw Pact and 40th Army, or limited contingent of Soviet forces in Afghanistan service. The Ilyich Eyebrows up armor kit, highlighted here in yellow on the turret and hull, are estimated to improve protection of the T-55M and T-55AM to that of a T-72 Ural in areas with add-on armor, and would require Ito or the Super Dragon, though Super Dragon didn't see a ton of service and Dragon was generally bad, to defeat, as well as requiring the M774 fin-stabilized discarding sabot to penetrate the areas where the up armor kit covers. The smoke grenades are highlighted in purple, the laser rangefinder in green, and the infrared searchlights in blue. This coloring scheme is kept consistent throughout. Introduced in 1983 as well, the T-55AD and AMD feature similar upgrades for the fire control, the hull armor, and the gun systems as the T-55AM, but with the DROSD, meaning Thrush, active protection system. This was the first of its kind fielded in the world, and DROSD is an interesting system. It's quite dangerous to anyone standing in front of the tank, as it fires a 107mm diameter explosive interceptor weighing 9 kilos to intercept and destroy incoming anti-tank rockets with a proximity fuse, like a flak shell. But from the tank crew's perspective, this is a lot better than the rocket hitting the tank and killing the crew. So it's a little bit of give and take. DROSD here is seen highlighted in yellow with the Ilyich Eyebrows type metal polymer armor fitted to the hull front, also highlighted in yellow. Smoke grenades aren't fitted to this tank, but some were fitted with smoke grenades, and the Luna IR searchlights are highlighted here in blue, with the KTD-2 laser rangefinder in green. I believe that has the NATO designation Sage Gloss. DROSD, seen here in a diagram from the Soviet Army manual published in 1985, can engage up to 8 projectiles with a velocity between 700 and 70 meters per second in an arc 40 degrees to either side of the turret front. However, it can only engage 2 targets in each of the 20-degree segments of that overall arc. The T-55 AMV or T-55 MV is a T-55 upgraded similarly to the T-55 AM or M, however with Contact 1 explosive reactive armor instead of Ilyich's eyebrows. Note the distinctive wedge made out of boxes shape to the up armor kit. The coverage of Contact 1 on the T-55 AMV is highlighted here in yellow with the KTD-1 Sage Gloss laser rangefinder in green, the bore evacuator in red, and the infrared search lamps in blue. Here's a picture from the other side showing the smoke grenades highlighted in purple, as well as systems featured in the previous picture. The T-62 series represent, broadly, a product improvement package for the T-55 with a 115mm smooth bore gun, again the first of its kind worldwide. The road wheels were rearranged to a 3 forward road wheels, then a gap, then 1 road wheel, then a gap, then the last road wheel arrangement. The armor isn't meaningfully improved, still being monolithic steel, though the turret is shaped somewhat differently and it is wider relative to the hull. This is visible in the right-hand vehicle in this picture. The effective rate of fire from the tank's gun also dropped somewhat, as the 115mm round was quite a bit longer and more cumbersome than the 100mm round in the T-55. That, in part, spurred the Soviets to look into the auto-loading guns which dominate their later tank designs. The T-62 Sans Suffixe has a different road wheel arrangement, and the bore evacuator was moved from right at the muzzle end of the gun to about 2/3 of the way down the barrel. In this profile view from another exercise, you can see the bore evacuator being moved back and the road wheel spacing quite clearly. Personally, this is a bit of an aside, I think that counting the gap between road wheels is a little optimistic in combat situations, as a clear view of the tank's side doesn't seem especially likely in a chaotic battlefield, but it's a common method of recognition, so I've included it for completeness' sake. The other side to that is that most tanks have relatively quite poor side armor, and if you see the side of the tank, it doesn't really matter what tank it is, you shoot at it, because it should generally penetrate. Also, in general, armor upgrades such as the gill armor, which I don't believe I mentioned because it's garbage and weird. It's just standoff plates on spring-loaded extensions off the side of the hull. The Contact 1 and Contact 5, or the metal polymer armor, all really matter more to what is necessary to identify and take out the tank, rather than which exact model of tank it is, especially when it comes to the T-55 or the T-62 series. It's more important to understand if this is a T-55 with Contact 1 or T-62 with Contact 1 than it is to understand, is this a T-55 model, 1973, or is this a T-54 model 1949 that's been upgraded quite severely. The T-62M is a mid-1980s T-62 upgrade along the lines of the T-55M and T-55AM, featuring a laser rangefinder composite metal polymer armor and the AT-12 Swinger gun-launched anti-tank missile. These gun-launched missiles, by the way, have a lower muzzle signature and quite a long range at high speed. The AT-12 Swinger's warhead is insufficient for Abrams Leopard 2 or Challenger-era NATO armor, the NATO box tanks, or earlier tanks with up-armor kits like the Chieftain Stilbruce turret or the M60A1 ERA. The AT-12 Swinger and AT-10 Stabber gun-launched anti-tank missiles were upgraded with a tandem warhead in the 90s, which did improve the effectiveness against frontal armor of the previously mentioned NATO tanks from poor to marginal, but that's still not very good. Consider anti-tank missile firing positions or anti-tank missile vehicles to be the sort of prime targets for these gun-launched missiles. The T-62M was widely deployed to Afghanistan as part of the limited contingent of Soviet forces in Afghanistan, or 40th Army. And here's a T-62M of the limited contingent of Soviet forces in Afghanistan, or 40th Army, in Afghanistan, with the relevant features highlighted. Again, laser rangefinder in green, bore evacuator in purple, Ilyich eyebrows in yellow, and the Luna IR spotlight in blue. The armor effectiveness of the T-62M is equivalent to the T-55M. The T-64 series, medium or main battle tank, was developed in the 1950s and 60s to solve the issues of trying to load a very large round in a very small tank bouncing over rough terrain, among other things. On introduction in the early 1960s, it was one of the most advanced tanks in the world, small, fast, and with a very powerful main gun, when it worked. The lengthy teething period, not helped by the complex opposed piston diesel engine, and some mismanagement by the Kharkov factory, now the Malyshev factory, led to the nicknaming by some of the T-64 as the Kharkovite failure tractor. The T-64 can be identified by the distinctive Kharkov-style road wheels, which are seen on quite a few other vehicles touched by Kharkov's hands, the infrared light on the left side of the gun. The T-64 also typically, but not universally, has one driver's periscope, and that the T-64 was never exported by the Soviet Union, and indeed it appears the only post-Soviet export customer is the Democratic Republic of Congo. All the other non-Russian T-64 users have Soviet vehicles they inherited. The T-64 also has a 5-cylinder opposed piston diesel engine, which makes a very distinctive sound. Note that it sounds something akin to the engine in a British Chieftain tank, but it's very distinctive when compared to the more typical big diesel V12 noise of the T-72. And the turbine whine of the T-80. The The T-64 sans suffix was introduced in 1964 and was relatively rare. Only 1,100 were produced, which is about 200 less than the German Nazi Panzer Mark VI Heavy Tiger tank. The T-64 sans suffix has a 115mm auto-loaded smoothbore gun, a 3-man crew, composite armor, in this case originally cast steel with aluminum inserts in the turret, a very low profile, and a distinct-sounding high RPM diesel engine, as we just heard. And the T-64, it's worth noting, had quite heavy armor for the era. Though it was never exported and low production numbers make information hard to come by, the hull likely requires ITO or M735 to penetrate the frontal arc, while the turret, due to weird construction, is harder to find information for, but again, probably ITO or M735 will do you good. The T-64A was an improved T-64 variant produced from 1971 with a new 125mm smoothbore auto-loaded cannon, better armor, and increased reliability. It was produced in large numbers, approximately 13,000 examples, and introduced a ceramic armor into the turret. The armor requires ITO or M774 105mm fin-stabilized discarding sabot, and post-1982 it would require M833, as they added a steel applique up-armor plate due to the lackluster performance of Soviet-exported T-72s in the 1982 Lebanon conflict. As regards the identification of the T-64A, note the range-finding blister on the roof circled in red, the left-hand side Luna infrared lamp, and the distinctive T-64 style road wheels, as well as the aforementioned audio cue. The T-64B is a 1976 modification of the T-64A that increased the turret and hull armor. It adds the AT-8 Songster gun-launched missile, a new fire control system, and a laser rangefinder. Songster, like other gun-launched anti-tank missiles, extends Soviet gun range and accuracy while having a smaller firing signature. However, the warhead on Songster is deeply underwhelming. AT-11 Sniper, introduced in 1985, has a far more powerful warhead, which is marginal against the frontal armor of early Abrams Leopard 2A0-4 and Challenger 1, but also expands the angle at which it could defeat the side armor. A tandem warhead version of AT-11 Sniper was introduced in 1989, which could likely defeat all in-service NATO armor frontally. Songster couldn't. Recognizing the T-64B can be done through the T-64 style road wheels, here circled in blue, the guidance system for AT-8 Songster circled in red, and the left-hand side Luna infrared search lamp circled in yellow, as well as the smoke grenades, which are circled in green. The T-64B likely requires ITO or M735 APF-SDS and M833 after 1984 when they added an applique plate to the frontal hull armor, just like with the T-64A. The T-64BV is a 1985 modification of the T-64B, featuring increased frontal hull armor, as well as the Contact 1 ERA explosive reactive armor over the front and sides of the vehicle. The T-64BV was both a new build vehicle as well as a retrofit kit for existing T-64B tanks. The retrofit package included a significant applique plate welded to the frontal hull, rather than the new builds, which had a new frontal hull array with 5 layers. The effective protection was the same between the two vehicles, however, the new build had a slightly more efficient layout in terms of weight for protection. The T-64BV can be recognized by the distinctive brick wedges on either side of the turret, the left-hand infrared lamp, the Contact 1 bricks extending 2/3 of the way down the side of the vehicle, and note that there will be a comparative section contrasting the various Contact 1 layouts side by side at the end of the video. The T-64BV likely requires M833 105mm armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot, or better, preferably 120mm armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot. Tandem charge heat warheads are a requirement to defeat Contact 1, such as TOW-2A, Milan 2T, Hot 3, AGM-114F, or better. Due to the initial teething problems with the T-64, the other two Soviet tank design bureaus, Leningrad Kirov and Ural Vagonzavod, Ural, were directed to produce a reliable 125mm smoothbore armed auto-loading tank of approximately similar specifications to the T-64, but functional. Ural designed a simple, reliable tank based around a derivative of the T-34's V12 diesel engine. This was adopted as the T-72 and is to date the second most produced post-war tank after the T-55, and one of the most widely exported. The T-72 was the low-cost workhorse of the Soviet tank fleet, with a standard diesel engine as opposed to opposed pistons or expensive gas turbines. Cheap, well-armored, and well-armed, it was a great, well-rounded tank. The T-72 Ural was the first model, and it entered production in '73. It was not meaningfully more technologically advanced than the T-64, however, it was far more reliable. The T-72 Ural is distinguished by the range-finding blister on the turret, the right-hand Luna infrared lamp, a rounded pure steel turret, and the more typical non-T-64 style road wheels, all circled here in red. The T-72 Ural is relatively well armored for its time, and likely requires Ito or Milan 2 or better to penetrate, but it is vulnerable to 120mm rifled armor-piercing discarding sabot and 105mm armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot or better. Entering production in '79, the T-72A features an updated turret with ceramic composite armor in the middle, vastly increasing the protection against heat warheads. The hull armor remains the same as on the T-72 Ural. It also features a laser rangefinder in the gunner's sight doghouse, removing the optical rangefinder blister from the turret design, and a number of smoke dischargers were added. The composite turret armor causes unpredictable post-penetration behavior for kinetic penetrators. However, it is known to be quite resilient to contemporary 105mm armor-piercing discarding sabot, as well as 105mm armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot into the mid-1980s. Ito or later heat warheads will kill it, however. The new shape of the turret with the increased frontal armor thickness was nicknamed the Dolly Parton armor after the well-endowed American singer. Note the smoke dischargers circled in green and the lack of range-finding blister circled in red. In 1984, the Soviets introduced an upgrade for the T-72A, the T-72AV, which adds a large array of Contact 1 explosive reactive armor boxes to the front and sides of the vehicle. This doesn't notably improve the resistance to kinetic penetrators, but drastically reduces the effect of non-tandem heat warheads. This is because Contact 1 is optimized heavily to defeat heat warheads, not kinetic penetrators. The T-72AV is distinguished by the many boxes added to the vehicle containing the reactive armor elements, and that they're in a wedge on the turret, as opposed to later Contact 1 armed T-72s, which have them smooth to the turret. T-72 production shifted gradually from the A to the B between 1983 and 1985, with the latter years seeing the T-72B Model 1985 rollout, as well as peak T-72 production at 1,559 pieces. The T-72B incorporated a wide variety of improvements, from a new laser rangefinder to the AT-11 Sniper anti-tank missile. Most notable is the Super Dolly Parton turret armor, a form of special armor or non-explosive reactive armor, similar in concept to the armor on Abrams Leopard 2 or Challenger. Protection of the T-72B was optimized around kinetic threats, mainly the 105 and 120mm armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot, with an effective space steel frontal hull array, as well as the before-mentioned special or NERA turret armor. Technically, note the tank pictured here is a T-72A hull with a T-72B turret for parade use, but it shows the parts that I want to make clear, such as the new Super Dolly Parton turret armor. All T-72Bs in service were fitted from the factory with explosive reactive armor tiles. The T-72B Model 1985, pictured here, features Contact 1 explosive reactive armor all over it and half-rubber mudguards. That's one of the distinguishing features that is more delineated between the T-72As and Bs. The T-72B Model 1985 would likely require late 1980s vintage 120mm armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds, or tandem-charge heat warheads, or a Maverick anti-tank missile for reliable armor defeat. With the Contact 1, without Ito should probably defeat the armor. The AT-11 Sniper upgraded to a tandem warhead in 1989, which could likely defeat all contemporary NATO threat armor frontally, as well as the generally quite effective Soviet kinetic rounds. The T-72B Model 1989 increases the frontal armor with the addition of a layer of special armor, or NIRA, and an array designed to work with the Contact 5 explosive reactive armor package. Contact 5 can be distinguished by the distinctive wedge shapes visible on the turret, and is an advanced explosive reactive armor design effective against kinetic penetrators as well as heat warheads. Where the front of the tank is covered by Contact 5, it will resist all Cold War-era 120mm smoothbore NATO tank ammunition, as well as all 120mm rifled NATO tank ammunition, 105mm rifle or smoothbore NATO ammunition, and probably some earlier tandem charge heat warheads. The performance of these relatively modern armor designs against relatively modern anti-armor weapons gets somewhat challenging to determine due to the requirement to know the great secrets of the universe, which I don't. The recognition features of the T-72B Model 1989 include the Contact 5 armor package highlighted in yellow, the Luna infrared lamp highlighted in blue, and the smoke grenades in purple. The AT-11 Sniper gun-launched anti-tank missile with tandem charge warhead entered service the same year as T-72B Model 1989, and again provided effective armor defeat against contemporary NATO main battle tanks from the front. Here's a top-down view of the T-72B Model 1989 cast turret. It is cast with armor pockets like previous T-72B turrets, and you'll notice the 4-panel Contact 5 coverage as opposed to 3 panels on T-90 Model 1992, also known as T-72BU or T-88, or 5 Contact 5 panels or relict panels on the T-72B3. The armor pockets built into the cast turret allow the armor package within them to be relatively easily swapped out by cutting the welds that are securing the top plates of the armor pockets and then replacing the armor package inside and putting the armor pockets back and welding it back shut. The upside of this for the user is that you can up-armor your tanks by putting a more modern design of armor in them. The downside for the open source intelligence enthusiast and wargamer and people that don't know the great secrets of the universe is that it looks the same from the outside. Also, note the tiles on top of the turret, which are there to protect against top attack munitions, such as the dual-purpose improved conventional munition. The limited frontal coverage of Contact 5 due to the gaps between the wedges, as well as the hole for the gun and the searchlight, seemed to be a continuing problem for Soviet Contact 5 equipped vehicles, although the presence of Contact 5 is still a significant and very much beneficial increase in armor. The Cadillac of Soviet tanks, the T-80 series were expensive and luxurious. Designed to fix the T-64's reliability issues, the Leningrad Kirov plant corrected Kharkov by jamming a jet turbine in the back because they felt this was more sane than a 5-cylinder opposed-piston diesel. Whether this was the case or not, it certainly produced a very fast, quiet, reliable, and cold-weather resilient tank, though a very expensive one, even in a communist economy where prices were somewhat arbitrary. The T-80 Sans-Suffix entered production in 1976 and was somewhat underwhelming, fitting a T-64A turret to a new hull, and as such only saw limited production. The armor is broadly equivalent to a T-64A. The recognition features are a T-64A turret, outlined in blue, on a distinctive not a T-64 hull, outlined in red. The T-80 Sans-Suffix was not produced in large numbers, as the Soviets had solved the T-64's reliability issues by the mid-70s, and couldn't find much justification for buying large numbers of tanks, which proved no real meaningful improvement or even difference over the T-64A, other than being far more expensive. The T-80 Sans-Suffix is also sometimes called the T-80A, but this is a misnomer. T-80A refers to a weird prototype that didn't see any real use. Entering service just 2 years later, the T-80B added the AT-8 Songster anti-tank guided missile, AT-11 Sniper after 1985, improved armor, and a new fire control system. The armor is superior to both T-64B and T-72A, but not enough that Ito should have issues killing it. Here we can see the fire control system for AT-8 Songster highlighted in red. It's the long, low rectangular box on the tank's right-hand side top of the turret, viewer's left. The right-hand Luna infrared illuminators in blue and the driver's 3 periscopes are in green, part of the luxurious accoutrement for the crew. In '85, the Soviet Army introduced the T-80BV, which featured a new and upgraded hull armor and the Contact 1 explosive reactive armor package. Vulnerable to Hot 2 and Tow 2 without the ERA, it requires tandem warheads to defeat the armor with Contact 1 fitted. DM-33 or M829A1 is required to defeat the upgraded upper frontal hull armor, and AT-11 Sniper came standard. British intelligence obtained these pictures in the late 1980s. They show the T-80BV, at the time the latest T-80 variant, was 1.2 metric tons heavier than the standard T-80B, with a new frontal hull armor too. This was the boogeyman of the group of Soviet forces Germany for the mid to late 1980s. The ERA bricks are highlighted in yellow, the IR lamp in blue, mostly masked by the gun. The smoke grenades are in purple, and note the suspension, which is not quite a T-72, the road wheels are a bit small, and not quite a T-64, it's properly designed. For the rivet counters, the easiest way to note it is the 3 close pairs of road wheels, equally spaced. Also note the large snorkel set fitted to the rear of the turret. There are various types of snorkel that were generally fitted to most Soviet main battle tanks as part of their standard equipment for fording rivers. Here's a T-80BV in snow camouflage. The T-80BV and other modernized T-80 variants, such as the BVM, have seen a resurgence recently in the Arctic due to greater reliability of the gas turbine engine starting in very cold climates compared to a diesel. And here, finally, is a somewhat damaged photograph of a T-80BV in its natural Cold War habitat, an Eastern European birch forest. Introduced in 1986, but only seeing limited production until the late 1980s, the T-80U was a radical upgrade for the T-80 series tank. It incorporates all the advanced fire control systems available previously, with a new, even more accurate laser rangefinder, more lethal ammunition, and vastly improved armor. The armor's increased to equivalent or better than that of the T-72B, with a better layout of Contact 5. M829A2 or later, as well as modern tandem charge heat warheads, are required to defeat this armor. The T-80U's turret came from a T-64 upgrade program Kharkov was working on, and Kharkov also designed a major subvariant of the T-80U, the T-80UD. Broadly, it's a T-80U with the engine derived from a T-64, but 6 cylinders instead of 5, and this T-80UD replaced T-64BV in production in 1987. T-80UD and U differ in no real meaningful ways. However, they have different engines. Also, the T-80UD has a slightly different rooftop explosive reactive armor layout and a different fitting for the commander's anti-aircraft machine gun, akin to that of the M1A1, where you can operate the machine gun from inside the tank, which is good, but they're just building different vehicles to be different, and they don't provide actual benefits. Distinguishing the T-80U from the UD is best done by taking a look at the commander's machine gun fitting. The T-80U's commander's machine gun is fitted to one of 3 very simple pintle mounts that are only able to be operated from the turned-out position by the commander, while the T-80UD has a slightly different rooftop explosive reactive armor layout, and the commander's machine gun is fitted straight to the cupola and can be operated while under armor. Note also, on both tanks, that Contact 5 is present on the side skirts for the first third of the vehicle to improve the protected angle at the front. The Contact 5 panels on the turret and the hull, as well as the rubber metal standoff sheets on the turret, are highlighted in yellow here. The infrared illuminator in blue, the smoke grenades in purple, and note that the Contact 5 block outlined in orange above the driver has been folded back so that the driver can turn out without knocking his head on it. Again, note the large gap in Contact 5 coverage at the center of the turret. This could be due to the violence of action of Contact 5. It contains quite a lot of explosives, and not wanting to damage the gun. Finally, note the rounded shape given to the turret by the rubber metal sheeting of Contact 5. despite T-80U and UD having the most vertical turret armor face of any Soviet cast turret tank. Here is a view of a T-80U with the Contact 5 block above the driver lowered into combat position. And here you can see a T-80U alongside a T-90 model 1992 or a T-72BU or T-88. The T-80U is on the right, and the T-90 model 1992 or T-72BU or T-88 is on the left. On both, Contact 5 is highlighted in yellow, and the T-80U again has the block above the driver folded out of the way. The smoke dischargers are highlighted in purple, and the infrared systems, in this case the Luna on the T-80U, and the Stora on the T-72BU or T-88 or T-90 model 1992 are in blue. The T-90 model 1992 or T-72BU or T-88 has the thermal sight in magenta and the laser warning receiver in orange. I'm bringing up the T-88 or T-72BU or T-90 model 1992 here because broadly it's a T-72B model 1989, improved with some advanced technology from the T-80U and some other systems. Prototypes were produced in the late 1980s, but only about 200 of the original T-90 model 1992 were produced after the fall of the Soviet Union. The armor quality of the T-72BU or T-88 or T-90 model 1992 is approximately equivalent to the T-80U, though probably with better frontal hull armor. The future Soviet tank that this represents will be discussed in a separate forthcoming video looking at both NATO and the Soviet perspectives of what the Soviet tank fleet would be during the 90s and beyond. Expect that whenever I finish the overall field guide. Now let's compare and contrast some of the various similar looking up armor kits. Here on the left you have the T-55M versus the T-62M on the right. And here we can see the T-55AMV versus the T-62MV versus the T-64BV versus the T-72AV, the T-72B model 1985, and the T-80BV. This should give you an idea of the differences between the Contact 1 layouts on the various tanks. Most of them are a wedge made out of boxes, but the wedge is shaped slightly differently. The T-64BV is notable, for example, for having the wedges perpendicular to the turret face, whereas most of the other ones have the wedges where the blocks are in line with the front of the vehicle, and the T-72B model 1985 has them smooth to the turret face. And now let's compare and contrast the T-72B model 1989 and the T-80U and the T-72BU with their Contact 5 layouts. I'm not including some of the more esoteric Contact 5 equipped vehicles like Ukrainian T-64s that have Contact 5 or the T-80 BVM, which has Relict but it's a similar style, or the T-55 M5 or M6, because those are post-Soviet and they're weird. This wraps up our overview of Soviet Cold War main battle tanks. Thank you for watching, like, commented, subscribe, and all that. And come back next time for my Soviet Army Field Guide Part 2, Armored Personnel Carriers, Infantry Fighting Vehicles, Airborne Fire Support Vehicles, and Scout Vehicles. Apologies for this taking so long. The whole Kung Flu situation caused a bit of an issue. See you next time.